The twin sons of Xyrus, 7, beat down on the cracked salt flats like molten hammers, turning the air into a shimmering furnace. Dust devils danced across the wasteland, kicking up rust-colored grit that coated everything. The shattered hulls of dropships, the skeletal remains of war machines, even the sweat-streaked face of Corporal Joran Vale as he crouched behind a collapsed blast wall. His armor, once a proud cobalt blue with silver trim, was now scorched black in places, dented in others, and smeared with alien blood that dried into iridescent flakes. He wasn't supposed to be here, not alone. Not after Command had written off Outpost Theta as lost. But then he'd seen the transmission, grainy, desperate, and heartbreakingly small. A child's voice, trembling, whispering coordinates through static, before the feed cut out. And in that sliver of footage, he'd seen her. Tiny, blue-skinned, with hair like spun moonlight, eyes wide with terror, clutching a broken doll made of scrap metal. Her name, according to the intercepted enemy chatter, was Lyra. Joran wasn't a hero. He was a mechanic-turned-soldier who joined the coalition forces because his sister's colony got glassed by the Cthar Dominion. He fixed engines, not people. But something about that little girl. Maybe it was the way her ears tapered to delicate points. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in her fear. Had hooked into his chest and refused to let go. So he'd gone AWOL, stolen a battered hoverbike, and ridden straight into hell. Now, crouched in the ruins of what used to be a medical bay, he watched the Cthar war base Gamma through thermal goggles. It wasn't just a base. It was a fortress carved into the bones of a dead Leviathan, its obsidian spires bristling with plasma turrets and crawling with hulking, chitinous soldiers whose mandibles clicked like death rattles. Lyra was in there, somewhere in the central spire, according to the intel he'd bribed from a half-dead smuggler in a dust-choked cantina 2 nights ago. The Cthar didn't take prisoners, they harvested. Genetic material, neural patterns, emotional resonance, all fuel for their bioengineered war machines. Children like Lyra, with their heightened empathic frequencies, were especially valuable. Joran's stomach twisted. He checked the charge on his pulse rifle. He had 2 concussion grenades, 1 plasma charge, and a half-empty canteen of recycled water that tasted like metal and regret. Not exactly the tools of a savior. But then again, maybe saviors weren't made of gear, they were made of stubbornness. He moved at dusk, when the twin suns bled into the horizon and the desert cooled just enough to stop frying unprotected skin. Using the shadows of fallen war beasts and collapsed energy conduits, he slipped past the outer patrols. His heart hammered like a faulty thruster. Every rustle of wind sounded like a Cthar scout. At one point, a patrol drone hovered inches above his hiding spot, its red eye scanning. Joran held his breath, pressing himself into the sand until his ribs ached. The drone whirred, turned, and drifted away. He exhaled slowly, tasting dust and adrenaline. Inside the base, the air was thick with the stench of ammonia and burnt flesh. Bioluminescent fungi pulsed along the walls, casting eerie green light on corridors lined with containment pods, some empty, some still twitching. Joran moved like a ghost, disabling security nodes with jury-rigged EMP bursts from his wrist comm. He found Lyra in a chamber deep within the spire, suspended in a nutrient gel inside a transparent cylinder. She was curled into a ball, her white hair floating around her like a halo, eyes closed. Alive. Relief hit him like a physical blow. But there was no time to celebrate. Alarms blared, a proximity breach. They'd found him. Chaos erupted. Cthar warriors poured into the corridor, their carapaces gleaming under the fungal glow. Joran fired, his pulse rounds punching through chitin, but they kept coming. He grabbed Lyra's pod release lever and yanked. Nothing. Locked. He slammed his rifle but against the control panel. Sparks flew. Still nothing. A Cthar lunged, claws extended. Joran sidestepped, drove his combat knife into its joint, and twisted. The creature shrieked and collapsed. But more were coming. He saw the detonator switch on the wall, a failsafe to purge the lab in case of breach. His eyes darted to the plasma charge strapped to his back. An idea, insane and desperate, formed. He couldn't carry Lyra and fight his way out, but he could make sure no one took her again. With a roar that was equal parts fury and grief, Joran ripped the plasma charge from his pack, slapped it onto the base of Lyra's pod, and set the timer for 30 seconds. Then he sprinted, not away, but deeper into the base, toward the central reactor core he'd spotted on the smuggler's schematics. If he could overload it, the whole spire would go up. He'd die. But Lyra, maybe the blast would crack her pod open. Maybe the shockwave would throw her clear. It was a gamble with cosmic stakes. He ran like the devil himself was chasing him, which, in a way, he was. Cthar warriors snapped at his heels. He ducked into maintenance shafts, slid down corroded chutes, and finally burst into the reactor chamber. A cavernous space humming with raw energy, blue lightning arcing between crystalline columns. He slapped his last EMP grenade onto the primary regulator and primed it. 10 seconds. He turned to run but froze. Standing at the chamber entrance, silhouetted by the corridor's green light, was a figure unlike any Cthar he'd ever seen. Tall, slender, with skin the deep blue of twilight oceans and hair like liquid silver cascading past her waist. Her eyes, large, luminous, and the color of storm clouds, locked onto his. She wore armor of polished obsidian etched with glowing runes, but it was cracked and scorched, as if she'd fought her way here too. In her hand, she held a staff tipped with a pulsing crystal. She didn't look like an enemy. She looked like a mother. "Lyra," she whispered, her voice melodic yet sharp with anguish. Joran didn't have time to explain. "Your daughter. She's in the lab. Pod 7. I've rigged a charge. Reactor's gonna blow. Run." The woman's eyes widened. For a heartbeat, she seemed to weigh his words against the chaos around them. Then, with impossible speed, she darted past him, not toward the exit, but toward the lab. Joran cursed and followed. The EMP grenade detonated behind them. The reactor's hum rose to a scream. Lights flickered. The ground trembled. They reached the lab just as Joran's plasma charge exploded. The pod shattered. Lyra tumbled out, gasping, covered in gel but alive. The silver-haired woman scooped her up, cradling her like the most precious thing in the galaxy. Which, to her, she was. She looked at Joran, tears tracing silver paths down her blue cheeks. You did this for her? No time." Joran grabbed her arm. "Move." They ran. The base groaned like a dying god. Cracks spiderwebbed across the walls. Behind them, the reactor chamber collapsed in a bloom of blue-white fire. The shockwave hit them like a freight train, throwing them into a service tunnel just as the entire spire imploded. Stone, metal, and Cthar warriors were swallowed in a maelstrom of fire and debris. The desert outside lit up as if a second sun had been born. When the dust settled, Joran coughed himself awake, half buried in rubble. His armor was gone. His skin was raw, but he was alive. Nearby, the blue-skinned woman knelt over Lyra, checking her pulse, murmuring soft words in a language that sounded like wind through crystal chimes. The little girl stirred, opened her eyes, and reached for Joran. "You came," she said, her voice small but steady. "Yeah," Joran rasped, sitting up. "Guess I did." The woman looked at him then. Not with suspicion, not with gratitude, but with something deeper, something that made his chest ache in a new and unfamiliar way. "I am Vela," she said, "of the Silthari, my daughter." She spoke of a human with kind eyes who promised to find her. Joran blinked. "She said that." Lyra nodded, clutching her broken doll. "You smell like oil and courage." He couldn't help but laugh. A raw, hoarse sound that turned into a cough. "Well, I'm Joran, and I smell like I just blew up a war base." Vela stood, helping Lyra to her feet. She studied him, her storm-gray eyes searching his face as if reading a map of his soul. "The Cthar will hunt us now," she said quietly. "They do not forgive losses, especially not ones that cost them a reactor core and a genetic archive." "Then we'd better keep moving," Joran said, pushing himself up. His legs wobbled, but he stayed upright. "Got a bike hidden half a click east. It's beat up, but it runs." Vela hesitated. "You would take us with you? We are not your people. We are not even your species." Joran looked at Lyra, who was staring at him with unwavering trust. He thought of his sister lost to war. He thought of the emptiness that had followed him like a shadow since. "Doesn't matter," he said. "Your people. That's enough." They found the hoverbike where he'd left it, half buried under a dune. Joran jury-rigged the power cell while Vela scanned the horizon with her staff, which doubled as a sensor array. Lyra sat on a rock, braiding her white hair with strips of cloth from Joran's torn undershirt. The desert stretched around them, vast and indifferent. But for the first time in years, Joran didn't feel alone. As they sped across the salt flats, the wind whipping at their faces, Vela rode behind him, one arm wrapped around his waist, the other holding Lyra close. Her touch was cool against his sunburned skin, but it didn't feel cold. Felt like shelter, like possibility, Days turned into weeks. They avoided coalition patrols. Joran was still AWOL. And Kthar hunter squads, moving by night, hiding by day in the ruins of ancient cities swallowed by the sands. Vela taught Joran words in Silthari. Lyra taught him how to weave desert grass into bracelets. He taught them how to hotwire alien tech and brew coffee from ration packs. They laughed over burnt meals and shared stories under star-dusted skies. Joran learned that Vela was a scholar, not a warrior. She'd been studying ancient energy signatures when the Kthar raided her research outpost and took Lyra. She tracked them across 3 systems, using nothing but intuition and a broken comms beacon. One evening, as they camped in the hollowed-out ribcage of a fossilized sky whale, Vela asked him why he'd done it. Why risk everything for a child he didn't know? Joran poked the fire with a stick. I guess I couldn't stand the idea of her being alone in the dark. Not when I knew what that felt like. Vela was silent for a long time. Then she reached out and touched his hand. Her fingers were slender, her nails tipped with pearlescent blue. You are not alone anymore, Joran Vale. He looked into her eyes and saw not just gratitude, but something tender and growing, like the first green shoot after a desert rain. He didn't say anything. He just squeezed her hand back. But peace, even fragile peace, never lasts long in war zones. One morning, as they scouted a canyon for water, Lyra's doll began to hum. The crystal in its chest glowed faintly. Vela's face went pale. It's a tracer, she whispered. The Kthar embedded it in her toy. They've been tracking us. Before Joran could react, the sky darkened. 3 Kthar dropships descended like vultures, their engines screaming. Plasma bolts rained down, scorching the canyon walls. Joran grabbed Lyra and shoved her behind a boulder. Run, he yelled to Vela. Take her to the eastern ridge. I'll hold them off. No! Vela's voice cracked like thunder. She raised her staff, and the air around her shimmered. We fight together. What followed was a blur of fire and fury. Vela unleashed energy pulses from her staff, each one precise and devastating. Lyra, wide-eyed but steady, used her empathic resonance to disrupt the Ktharis neural links, causing them to stagger and fire wildly. Joran, armed with nothing but a scavenged pistol and sheer stubbornness, picked off stragglers and laid down covering fire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they were united. In the chaos, Joran took a plasma bolt to the shoulder. He went down hard, vision swimming. Vela screamed his name and rushed to him, shielding his body with hers as she channeled a barrier of pure energy. The Kthar faltered, confused by this alliance of human and Silthari. Seizing the moment, Lyra focused all her will into one final pulse, a wave of empathic dissonance that shattered the Ktharis command frequency. The dropships veered off, their pilots disoriented. Silence fell, broken only by Joran's ragged breathing. Vela cradled his head in her lap, tears falling onto his face. Don't you dare leave us, she whispered fiercely. I'm not going anywhere, he managed, wincing. Got too much coffee left to drink. She laughed through her tears. Lyra hugged them both, her small body trembling but strong. They patched Joran up in a hidden cave, using Silthari healing salves that smelled like crushed stars. As he healed, something shifted between them. Vela's touches lingered longer. Her eyes held his a moment too deep. Joran, who'd spent years building walls around his heart, found them crumbling like sandcastles in a tide. He'd saved Lyra, but in doing so he'd been saved too. One night, under a sky so clear it felt like you could touch the galaxies, Vela sat beside him at the cave entrance. The desert wind played with her silver hair. On my world, she said softly, we believe souls are drawn together across lifetimes, that love is not bound by form, but by resonance. Joran looked at her, really looked, at the grace in her posture, the intelligence in her eyes, the fierce love she carried like a weapon and a shield. I don't know about lifetimes, he said, but right now, this feels like the only thing that makes sense. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Then let us make sense together. But the war wasn't done with them. Weeks later, a coalition scout drone spotted their camp. Joran's face appeared on wanted posters across 3 sectors. Deserter, traitor, ally of alien insurgents. Command wanted him brought in or eliminated. At the same time, Kthar bounty hunters began appearing in frontier towns, asking about a blue-skinned woman and a human with a limp. They couldn't stay hidden forever. One evening, as they debated their next move, Lyra tugged Joran's sleeve. There's a place, she said, beyond the glass wastes, The sanctuary. My mother's people. They have a hidden colony there. No one knows but us. Vela nodded slowly. The Azure Haven. It's real. I thought it was just a myth. It's real, Lyra insisted. The stars told me. Joran looked at the two of them, his unlikely family, and made a decision. Then that's where we're headed. The journey would be dangerous. The glass wastes were a sea of razor-sharp silica that reflected the sun into blinding mirages. Water was scarce. Predators lurked in the dunes. And both the Coalition and the Cthar would be hunting them. But as they packed their meager supplies, Joran felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing kind that had driven him into the warbase, but a quiet, steady flame. He had a purpose now. Not just to survive, but to protect. To build something new in the ashes of war. Vela caught his eye and smiled. A rare, full smile that lit up her face like dawn. Lyra skipped ahead, humming a silthery lullaby. Joran adjusted his pack, checked his pistol, and followed them into the unknown. The desert stretched before them, endless and harsh. But for the first time it didn't feel empty. Felt like a beginning. The glass wastes lived up to their name. By midday, the suns turned the endless dunes into a blinding mirror, each grain of silica glittering like shattered glass. Joran squinted through his cracked goggles, his boots crunching on the sharp terrain. Every step sent tiny cuts through his worn soles, but he didn't complain. Behind him, Vela walked with quiet grace, her bare feet somehow untouched by the razor edges. Silthery biology, she'd explained once. Their skin layered with a natural biofilm that hardened in harsh environments. Lyra rode on her back, wrapped in a sun-reflective shawl, half asleep with her cheek pressed against her mother's shoulder. They'd been walking for 3 days without finding water. Their canteens were nearly empty, and the ration packs had long since turned to dust. Joran's shoulder still ached from the plasma wound, a dull throb that flared with every breath. But worse than the pain was the silence between him and Vela. Not the comfortable quiet of shared exhaustion, but something heavier, something unspoken. It started the night before, when Vela had caught him staring at a faded photo tucked in his breast pocket. A young girl with brown braids and a gap-toothed smile. His sister, Mira. You carry her with you, Vela had said, not as a question but as an observation. Only way I can, he'd replied, tucking it away. She's gone. But I'm not ready to let her go. Vela had looked at him then with eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies of sorrow. I understand, she whispered. Lyra is all I have left of my mate. He fell defending our research vessel. She hadn't said more, but the weight of that loss hung between them like a third presence. Now, as the heat pressed down like a physical hand, Joran felt that distance grow. He wanted to reach for her, to say something, anything, but words felt clumsy in his mouth. So he walked, and she followed, and the desert swallowed their silence. Then, on the 4th day, they found the oasis. It wasn't on any map. Just a dip in the dunes where water pooled in a ring of black stone, surrounded by ghost-pale flowers that glowed faintly in the shade. Lyra squealed with delight and ran ahead, splashing in the cool water. Joran dropped to his knees and drank greedily, the liquid like liquid silver down his parched throat. But Vela didn't move. She stood at the edge of the oasis, staff raised, her expression taut. Something's wrong, she murmured. Joran froze. What? The water, it's too clean, too still. She pointed to the flowers. Those only bloom near silthery burial sites. This place is sacred and protected. As if on cue, the ground trembled. From beneath the black stone, figures emerged, tall, spectral beings with translucent skin and eyes like molten gold. The Watchers of the Wastes, ancient guardians of silthery dead. They moved without sound, their limbs elongated, their presence humming with latent energy. One stepped forward, its voice echoing not in the air but in their minds. You trespass on hallowed ground, Vela of the Azure Line. You bring a human, a creature of fire and steel, into our sanctuary. Vela bowed deeply. We mean no disrespect. We are hunted. We only sought water. The human carries death in his bones. The Watcher intoned, its gaze locking onto Joran. His hands have spilled Cthar blood, yes, but also the blood of innocence. We see the weight he carries. Joran stiffened. He hadn't told anyone about the civilian freighter he'd been ordered to destroy during the Battle of Helios Reach. A ship the Coalition claimed was smuggling weapons, but which turned out to be carrying refugees. He'd followed orders. He'd never forgiven himself. Vela turned to him, her eyes wide with understanding. Joran! Before he could speak, the watchers raised their hands. The oasis water began to boil. The ground cracked. They're going to kill us? Lyra cried, clutching her mother's leg. No, Vela said firmly. She stepped between Joran and the watchers. He is under my protection. His heart is scarred, yes, but it is not dark. He saved my daughter. He risked everything. If that is not worthy of sanctuary, then your judgment is blind. The watchers paused. The air grew still. Then the lead watcher tilted its head. Prove it. How? Vela asked. Let the bond be tested. If your resonance aligns, if your souls truly echo as one, then the oasis will accept him. If not, the sands will claim him. Before Joran could protest, Vela took his hand. Her touch was cool, steady. Trust me, she whispered. She led him to the center of the pool. The water swirled around their ankles, glowing brighter with every step. The watchers chanted in a language older than stars. Joran's pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted to pull away, to say this was madness. But then Vela looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not just hope, but faith. In him, she placed her palm over his heart. Let them see what I see, she said softly. A surge of energy shot through him. Not pain, but warmth, like sunlight after a long winter. Images flashed in his mind. Vela laughing as Lyra braided her hair. Vela weeping over his wounded body. Vela watching him sleep, her expression tender. And beneath it all, a quiet, growing certainty that he mattered to her. Not as a soldier, not as a savior, but as Joran. The water around them erupted in light. The ghost flowers bloomed fully, their petals unfolding into radiant silver stars. The watchers bowed. The bond is true, they intoned. Go in peace. The path to Azure Haven is open to you. As they left the oasis, Joran's hand lingered in Vela's. Neither spoke, but something had shifted, deepened. That night, as they camped beneath a sky streaked with auroras, Vela sat beside him and rested her head on his shoulder. I didn't know love could feel like this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. After my mate, I thought my heart was sealed in ice. Joran swallowed hard. Mine was buried in rubble. You dug it out. She smiled, and for the first time, she kissed him. Not on the cheek, not in gratitude, but with a quiet intensity that made his breath catch. It was soft, brief, but it carried the weight of promises neither had dared to speak. The peace once again was short-lived. 2 days later, they reached the edge of the wastes, where the dunes gave way to jagged mesas. There, waiting in the shadow of a rock formation, was a figure in coalition armor, black and silver, bearing the insignia of internal security. Joran's blood ran cold. Corporal Vale, the soldier said, removing his helmet. It was Captain Wren, his former CO, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper loyalties. You've caused quite a stir. Joran stepped in front of Vela and Lyra. I'm not going back, Wren. I'm not here to take you in, she said, surprising him. She glanced at Vela. Command's changed its mind. Turns out the Kthar are developing a new bioweapon, one that targets empathic species. They used data harvested from Silthari children like her. She nodded toward Lyra. We need Vela's knowledge of Silthari neural architecture to stop it. And we need you to get her to the research station on Nova 9. Joran frowned. Why should we trust you? Last week I was a traitor. Because if the Kthar deploy that weapon, it won't just kill Silthari, it'll destabilize every empathic species in the coalition, including human telepaths. Billions could die. Wren's voice was grim. This isn't about loyalty anymore. It's about survival. Vela stepped forward. I will help, but only if Joran comes with me, and Lyra stays safe. Wren nodded. Agreed. There's a transport waiting 2 clicks east. But be warned, Kthar scouts have been spotted in the area. They know you're heading for the haven. They moved quickly. The transport was a sleek, unmarked shuttle hidden in a dry riverbed. As they boarded, Joran felt a knot of dread tighten in his gut. Something felt off. Wren was too cooperative, too calm. Mid-flight, the shuttle's comms crackled. A distorted voice spoke. Not Kthar, not coalition. Vela, you shouldn't have left the wastes. Vela went pale. That's impossible. The voice belonged to her mate, Kalen. But Kalen was dead. She'd seen his ship explode. Before anyone could react, the shuttle's engines sputtered. The lights died. They were drifting, powerless, over hostile territory. Wren cursed. Sabotage. Someone knew we'd take this route. Then the truth hit Joran like a plasma bolt. Ren, you're working with them, aren't you? The Kthar. She didn't deny it. Not with them. Against them. But I needed leverage. Vela's research is the key to ending this war, not just slowing it down. The Coalition High Command is too cautious. I'm not. You used us, Joran growled. I gave you a chance to be more than a deserter, she shot back. Now you can be a hero. Vela stood, her staff glowing. You will not hand my daughter over to anyone. Before violence could erupt, the shuttle shuddered violently. A Kthar gunship had locked onto them. Plasma fire streaked past the hull. In the chaos, Lyra screamed. Not in fear, but in pain. She clutched her head, her eyes rolling back. They're calling me, she gasped. The weapon. It's awake. Vela rushed to her side. Her empathic field is resonating with the prototype. It's pulling her in. Joran made a split-second decision. He grabbed the shuttle's emergency thruster controls, a manual override most pilots ignored. Hold on, he yelled, and slammed the thrusters to full. The shuttle lurched downward, diving into a canyon just as the Kthar gunship fired. The blast missed them by meters, scorching the canyon walls. Joran wrestled with the controls, guiding them through narrow passes with the instinct of a man who'd spent years fixing ships, not flying them. Somehow, they made it to a hidden cave system. The shuttle crashed in a shower of sparks, but everyone survived. Ren was unconscious. Vela tended to Lyra, whose breathing was shallow, her skin flickering with faint blue pulses. The weapon is linked to her DNA. Vela realized, horrified. They used her genetic signature to calibrate it. She's not just a target. She's the key. Joran knelt beside them. Then we destroy it before it's deployed. But how? Vela asked, tears in her eyes. It's on a mobile dreadnought, hidden in the storm belts of Xyrus 7's outer ring. Joran looked at her, then at Lyra, then at the broken shuttle. A reckless, impossible plan formed in his mind. We steal a Kthar dropship, infiltrate the dreadnought, and blow it to hell. Vela stared at him. You'd do that again? He smiled faintly. For you? For her? In a heartbeat. This time, though, it wouldn't be a suicide run. This time, they'd go in together. As they scavenged parts from the shuttle to repair a Kthar dropship they found abandoned nearby, Vela worked beside Joran in silence. But now, the silence was different, charged with something new. Not just trust, but partnership. Love, not as a feeling, but as a choice they kept making, again and again in the face of chaos. One evening, as they tested the dropship's cloaking field, Vela touched his arm. If we survive this, she said quietly, I want to show you the Azure Haven, not as refugees, as a family. Joran's throat tightened. He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. Then we're surviving. Above them, the storm belts churned like angry gods. The dreadnought waited. The weapon hummed with stolen innocence. And somewhere in the void, a little girl's heartbeat echoed like a war drum. But for now, in the quiet of the cave, with the woman he loved beside him and the child who believed in him asleep in the corner, Joran Vale felt something he hadn't dared hope for. A future worth fighting for. The storm belts of Xyrus 7 roared like the breath of a dying star, lightning arcing between clouds of ionized dust as Joran guided the stolen Kthar dropship through the tempest. Vela sat beside him, her fingers dancing across a jury-rigged console, using her silvery resonance to mask their biosignatures from the dreadnought scanners. In the cargo hold, Lyra slept fitfully, wrapped in a thermal blanket, her small body still humming with the echo of the bioweapons call. They'd left Ren behind, bound but alive, with a message for Coalition Command. If you want to stop the weapon, follow the trail we leave in fire. The dreadnought loomed ahead, a monstrous leviathan of black alloy and pulsing organic circuitry, its hull bristling with weaponized spines. It wasn't just a warship. It was a living forge, grown from Kthar biosteel and fueled by stolen empathy. At its heart, deep within the core chamber, pulsed the weapon. A sphere of writhing light, woven from the neural imprints of hundreds of silvery children, Lyra's among them. They docked in a maintenance bay under cover of a plasma surge. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and something darker, grief, distilled into energy. Kthar warriors patrolled the corridors, but Vela moved like a shadow, her staff silencing alarms with soft pulses of harmonic disruption. Joran followed, pulse rifle ready, heart hammering not with fear, but with purpose. They reached the core chamber. The weapon hovered above a dais, its light casting long, trembling shadows. Lyra stirred in Vela's arms, her eyes wide. "It's crying," she whispered, and it was. Not in sound, but in feeling. A chorus of stolen childhoods, trapped and screaming in silence. Vela set Lyra down gently. "You must disconnect it, little star," she said. "Only your resonance can undo what they've done." Lyra stepped forward, trembling but resolute. She placed her small hands on the chamber's interface. Her white hair began to glow. The weapon pulsed faster, as if recognizing its source. Joran stood guard, firing at Cthar reinforcements that poured in from the corridors. He was outnumbered, outmatched, but he held the line, his shots precise, his movements fueled by something deeper than training. He was protecting more than a mission now. He was protecting a future. Behind him, Lyra closed her eyes and sang. A wordless Silthari lullaby, the same one she'd hummed in the desert. The weapon's light softened. The screaming in their minds quieted. One by one, the stolen echoes unraveled, returning to the void from which they'd been torn. The sphere dimmed, then shattered into 1,000 harmless sparks. The dreadnought groaned. Without the weapon's stabilizing field, its biocore destabilized. Alarms wailed. The floor trembled. "Time to go!" Joran yelled, scooping Lyra into his arms. They ran. The dropship was where they'd left it, but the bay doors were closing. Vela raised her staff and unleashed a focused blast of energy, jamming the mechanism just long enough for them to leap aboard. Joran fired the thrusters, and they shot out of the bay as the dreadnought began to collapse in on itself, consumed by its own unraveling biology. They watched from orbit as the storm belts swallowed the wreckage. Silence settled in the cockpit, exhausted, relieved, sacred. Weeks later, after delivering evidence of the Ctharis crimes to a reformed coalition tribunal, after Ren's conspiracy was exposed and the war shifted toward diplomacy, they finally reached the Azure Haven. It wasn't a fortress or a hidden base. It was a city of living crystal and flowing water, nestled in a valley shielded by ancient energy fields, where Silthari scholars, artists, and healers lived in harmony with the land. Trees with silver leaves whispered in the breeze. Rivers glowed with gentle bioluminescence. And for the first time, Joran felt he belonged somewhere. Vela was welcomed as a hero, Lyra as a miracle, but it was Joran they embraced as family. Months passed. He learned to speak Silthari, though he still butchered the vowels. He helped rebuild the Haven's energy grid, his mechanical mind finding joy in elegant alien engineering. Lyra started school, her empathy now a gift she used to comfort others, not a vulnerability to be exploited. And every evening, he and Vela walked the crystal paths, hand in hand, watching the twin moons rise over the valley. One night, beneath a sky dusted with unfamiliar constellations, Vela stopped him on the Starlight Bridge, a slender arch of living quartz that hummed with ancestral memory. "You came into our lives like a storm," she said softly, her storm-gray eyes shimmering. "And you stayed like the dawn." Joran smiled. "I didn't have a choice. You too, you're my home." She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a circlet of woven moon silver, set with a single blue crystal that pulsed faintly with warmth. "In Silthari tradition," she said, "we do not say, 'I marry you.' We say, 'I choose you,' again and again, across all lifetimes." She placed the circlet on his brow. "I choose you, Joran Vale." He knelt, not out of submission but reverence, and offered her a ring he'd forged himself from the melted core of his old coalition dog tags, reshaped into a band etched with Silthari runes for courage, love, and forever. "I choose you, Vela of the Azure Line," he said. "Not just in this life, in every one." They were married at sunrise, on the shores of the Mirror Lake, where the water reflected not just their forms, but their souls intertwined. Lyra stood beside them, holding both their hands, her laughter ringing like bells. The entire haven gathered Silthari elders, coalition diplomats, even a few reformed Cthar defectors who'd sought asylum. There was music made of wind and crystal, feasts of glowing fruit and spiced nectar, and stories told late into the night. Years flowed like the rivers of the haven. Joran never wore armor again. Instead, he taught human engineering to Silthari youth and learned botany from Vela. They built a home of living wood and light, with a workshop for him and a garden of memory blooms for her. Lyra grew into a wise and kind young woman, her empathy now a bridge between species, her voice a force for peace. And every evening, without fail, Joran and Vela walked the Starlight Bridge, their hands entwined, their steps slow but sure. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't need to. The desert that had once been a battlefield had given way to a life blooming with quiet joy, deep love, and the kind of peace that is earned, not given. They had faced fire, betrayal, and the edge of annihilation. But in the end, what saved them wasn't weapons or war. It was the choice to love, fiercely and without condition. And so, beneath alien stars that now felt like old friends, Joran Vale, the mechanic who'd once fixed engines, spent the rest of his days mending hearts, building futures, and loving a blue-skinned woman with silver hair and storm-gray eyes who had chosen him, again and again, across all lifetimes. They lived not just happily, but wholly, human and silvery, scarred and whole, forever bound by a little girl's whisper in the dark and the courage of a man who dared to answer it.